All right, hi everyone. Welcome to today's lunch break. I'm Carrie. Today we're here with Steve Sangapore. Steve is a contemporary oil painter based in Boston. From realism to abstraction, his paintings explore topics such as religion, consciousness, composition, and how the universe works. Thanks for being with us today. We're really excited to get to know more about your work. And for everyone listening, if you have questions throughout Steve's talk, you can type those into the Q&A box on Zoom, and we'll be answering a few of those at the end. To start off, Steve, can you tell us about the mediums and subjects you use in your work?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, like I said, primarily an oil painter. I've had quite a development over the last three and a half years in terms of subjects. Definitely always had focus on science and my interest in that whole domain, but also a little bit religion too. And the way those have sort of come out in the work has really transformed in a pretty rapid period of time, which has been really interesting because sort of keeping that core direction going, but also exploring like even different genres. Like the piece I have up here is very surrealistic, and what I'm doing now is more realism, and what I did in between is kind of a blend a little bit of those two things. So kind of having my mind be fairly consistent in where it's pointed, but sort of getting that message through in different styles and mediums and genres has been kind of interesting to see it evolve.
Yeah.
So this is a series I did. It's called Reflections. It started that in 2017. So what was interesting here is it's not a typical canvas. These are all like small canvases adhered together. So it's one piece. Just kind of exploring interesting shapes and trying to cater the message of the painting and the look of the painting to sort of adapt to whatever this goofy shape that I made was. So I'd kind of do the shape first and then try to figure out exactly what I was going to do with it. Sometimes I would have, canvases built like this for quite a long time until I was able to make something fit. But what started the idea, so in the center there is a mirror. And so I basically completed this whole piece without knowing what was going to go in the center. And the main theme here, it's called sensorium, and it's the five senses on each of the panels. And I needed something unifying in the middle to sort of bring all that together. So I kind of left that up for interpretation until I got to the end. And then I decided to just stick a mirror right in the middle. So the idea there was kind of, yourself being reflected, your consciousness sort of being, and your experience being manifest through all the sensory input. So it was kind of a unique way of sort of presenting that idea, where it's more than what's just on the canvas. It's, the viewer's face is literally in the piece when they're viewing it. I kind of kept going with that idea. This is a little bit less precise in terms of the subjects, where the mirrors here are more of an aesthetic thing, and they don't really play into the message of the work so much. And the message is kind of loose. I kind of have a lot of sort of scientific imagery, but also like recognizable like landscapes. It's actually one of my favorite painters of all time, Albert Bierstadt. That's kind of a cover of one of his paintings.
Mm.
So like you can kind of, what's interesting about it and what's interesting about surrealism is it's kind of up to the viewer, because you're presented with a variety of recognizable images, but they're sort of juxtaposed in a way where it relies on the viewer to make the relationships between those objects. So with this one, it's kind of, I've heard some really goofy interpretations of this one.
Mm.
A lot of people thought the sort of the city in the bubble above the hand was a comment on like flat Earth and stuff, which is,
Wow, interesting.
yeah, was at least the first time I heard it was slightly insulting, I think. But yeah, it was more of kind of like an environment, a comment on the environment and how we were related to that, or related to our environment and what we're doing to it. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to sort of loosely like take some imagery and juxtapose it together and just kind of see what happens and what you can kind of make of like the hand, and then the sort of in the center there, the fanning out of scale in nature from like particles to molecules, cells, bacteria, you know, the world as we see it, and then like the macroscopic scale being the sort of nebula there.
How does it feel to you to leave the meaning more open to your viewers?
Well, I mean, it's really no different than normal, I would say, because ultimately that's where the art happens. Like for me, like art is, you know, it's the age-old question of what art is. And in the Western world, we have a habit of sort of seeing the object that was created by the artist as being the art,
Mm.
when it's actually just sort of the catalyst to more art, which is basically to say art is art making in the process of creating. And then through that, you kind of, this object, this artifact comes out of that. And then once you put it in the public domain and it's part of the community, the relationship between the viewer and that artifact and what goes on up here, art, and it's less the object. And I think that's kind of always, you know, what happens no matter what you're doing. So leaving it more up for interpretation was like, I could be as absolutely precise as I want to in getting a message across. It's still going to be interpreted in a variety of ways from the viewer anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess this one was kind of fun in that I was less pointed, and I kind of wanted just to put a bunch of cool images together and kind of loosely get at what I was trying to say, but also kind of have a little bit more fun with it. It's a really interesting structure, so it was kind of, I felt like that was the way that I had to do it.
Yeah.
This exact same thing. I started this one with the portrait and didn't really intend on putting it together into a larger piece. I kind of want to just do a cover of Rubens' self-portrait. And it's kind of interesting. Same thing, had a lot going on, some sort of like archetypal science imagery sort of at the bottom. You have like very recognizable cells and molecules. They're a little tiny here, but yeah, and sort of how these all sort of blend into our reality. And there's, you know, very clearly some religious imagery in there as well. That's actually a real nail in the hand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in person. So I basically wanted to, it sounds ridiculous, but wanted to make it look as painful as possible. So I kind of used like really heavy gloss medium, you know, some reds and put an actual nail in there. So up close, it's a little disturbing, which I was happy about. So yeah, I was working on this for a while, exploring sort of these shapes and relationships, incorporating the mirrors. It kind of became more of an aesthetic thing. And then I wanted to jump off, and so I spent a week with Alex Gray for a workshop, who's one of my favorite artists ever. And I sort of used that experience, which was like really emotionally transforming, but also creatively just super transforming. And I wanted to start something brand new that could sort of, bring me through the next maybe year and a half or so after this series, something that I could work towards an end goal. I wanted to have 12 paintings or so done in a year and a half, and I was very precise in what I wanted them to look like and what the subjects were going to be and how I was going to execute them. So definitely much more conservative and much more disciplined too, and much more pointed than this series, which felt really, really good. To kind of get out of that more spontaneous mindset and really hone in on a single idea.
Mm.
So these are two of the first ones that I did for that series. That's a younger me minus the glasses and beard now, and a portrait of my wife. So the title of this series is Superposition. And so the main question that the series asks is, does consciousness create the universe? And there's been some developments in science, namely quantum theory, that has sort of answered that question, that yes, it might actually be the case that sort of the conscious mind at least plays a role in objective reality. So it's called superposition, and the definition of a superposition is basically when a particle is spread out across all time and space, or at least all space, and it exists everywhere at the same time in a wave state. And so the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics basically tells us, and there's different interpretations, this isn't 100% like we know this to be a fact, but it's the most interesting to me. There's a variety of sort of ways to interpret the data that comes out of quantum mechanics. The many worlds theory, the Copenhagen interpretation. I liked that because the Copenhagen interpretation, because it says something. It leaves room for the observer to play a role in reality a little bit more than sort of other ways of interpreting that data, and consciousness plays an integral role in what reality looks like and how it's structured. So when an observer interacts with a particle, prior to interacting with it, it exists in a superposition state. So it's everywhere as a wave. And when they interact with it, it's called the collapse of the wave function. And that particle loses that wave state and collapses to a single, it has locality to a single point in space and time. And so basically, at a high level, the series is kind of like, well, if that phenomenon is happening, and I mean, we're all made of particles, so what's the implication there? And so I basically split the panels into two halves. One is this sort of creative line work that was meant to represent that sort of totally uncertain wave state. And then on the other half, I kind of rendered it in a more realist, with a more realist technique. Mm. That's sort of the reality, that collapsed reality that has a definite position and a definite place in time and space, and the reality is as we experience it. So I kind of just worked through a variety of subjects, landscapes, portraits, and what I really tried to do with this was weave in more of my personal story into everything. I didn't want to do anything that was totally insignificant. Like if I was going to do a portrait, I wanted it to be of somebody that had meaning to me, whether it's my wife or my friend or a self-portrait of myself. If I did a landscape, I wanted it to be from a place that I've been, or an area that I'm sort of passionate about. And these are Belgian landscapes. It was a trip to England. These are the two biggest of the series, and the ones that I probably like the most. Probably one of the greatest achievements creatively of my life is this one on the left here. Not going to get too into it, but so I wanted to keep that sort of theme, that superposition theme, but also really bake in some intense moments in my life. I lost my best friend to suicide 6 years ago, and I really wanted a way to sort of bake that experience in a therapeutic way, but also kind of marry it with the series that I was sort of working on. So it was a little tough, and I've been through some really low points in my life as well. So it was interesting to kind of find a way to blend this really intense emotional moment in my life with like my intellectual interest. More portraits, and this is that friend that I mentioned. Another picture of myself. So yeah, this is the new series that I'm working on here.
Great.
So I kind of moved away a little bit from, but not entirely, from sort of exploring scientific ideas and more religious. So I'm not religious myself. Was born into a completely secular family, but it's always been something that's really fascinated me, and always been something that I've been interested in, and sort of the relationship to that religion has with science is incredibly interesting, and sort of how those two domains communicate with each other. I know that at times, especially coming from the scientific community, they can seem quite at odds with each other, which is kind of unfortunate. I know some of the pioneers of the new atheist movement, Dennett, Dawkins, Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, all people that I really, really admire, and whose work that I've been interested in for a very long time. But I think they sort of miss something that religion brings to the human experience. When they kind of have this idea that the world might be better off without religion, but the religious experience is so integral to who we are as a species. I think it's not going to go away by sort of getting rid of that impulse, and that desire for the religious experience is always going to be there, and it'll manifest itself, maybe not through organized religion, but in some other way. The 20th century has a history of experimenting with that, and it doesn't really go well. So what I wanted to do with this series was I wanted to tackle some iconography from the major religions. And what I'm really interested in is how we relate both the religious and the secular community to these icons and these religious archetypes as we sort of move away from them. There are certain religious groups that are certainly growing, but the secular non-religious group is very much growing too. And the 20th century, 21st century at very accelerated rates for sure. So I'm kind of interested in how we not only relate to the religious systems, but these sort of archetypal figures that champion each of the religions themselves. And so these are really big. Each one is 4 feet wide, 6 feet tall. So when they're up on the wall, they're not 1:1 scale, but they kind of feel like that. So the viewer's head is like pretty much flush with the head of these figures. And instead of rendering the faces, I wanted to literally cut a hole right into the canvas and put a mirror in it.
Wow.
So when the viewer looks at, and which is kind of bringing back from that original series, that the use of the mirror. So when the viewer is in front of it, the faces of the holy are replaced by the viewer. Just some detail shots. And so it's been a really major undertaking. There's a lot of research that goes into this. And I'm hoping at the end of it, it's going to take about 2 years. I'm about 20% done now. I wanted to come out of it better understanding my relationship to these organized religions, having a better knowledge of them, having a better knowledge of their evolutionary histories, and the evolution of the concept of God as a whole is extremely interesting to me, and that's something I wanted to just really dive into. And when the series is finished, I'm hoping to be able to sort of relate to these communities a little bit more. And it's not, the audience for them it's both like the religious community, the secular community. It's just trying to cast that net a little wider and open up that conversation of how we relate to these systems, and what are the sort of consistencies that thread through all of them, and how we as individuals relate to all of them. I mean, there's something of value not only in each one, but in each of the characters too, as you learn a little bit about their life. And we make God in our own image. It's not really the other way around. And so a community will create a figure based on its own values and ethics, and we can all sort of relate to each one in our own way, and kind of replacing the portraits with the viewer's face, I thought was a really not only unique but really immediate of getting that across.
Yeah.
When kind of in front of them, they're pretty intense. I mean, the Christ figure, it's not it's an image of sacrifice. It's not meant to bring a smile to your face. It's really, really intense. And when you're up close to it, this painting in particular, and you're kind of confronted with that moment of Jesus on the cross, and then your face is kind of in the painting. It's a
Yeah, that's really powerful. Just to do a brief time check, I want to make sure we get to some questions at the end and hear about where we can see your work. So just a few more minutes with this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down to do questions now.
Okay. Do you want to briefly tell us where we can see your work or how we can keep up with what you're doing in this time?
Yeah, well, my work can be seen at Sangapore.com, just my last name.com, and on Instagram, just at Steve Sangapore. Yeah, not much live shows going on right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, which was even more unfortunate, the whole SoA Arts District in Boston was recently flooded.
Oh no. Oh my God.
On top of all this craziness. And the gallery I'm with had, it was devastating to see, honestly. I saw some pictures, and there was a show that was still up that was just never taken down because of the whole social distancing. Nobody could get in there. But the water level was just like right under the canvases, and I just, like, my heart sunk. I was happy that none of my work was in there, but really people that had stuff in there.
Wow.
But yeah, no live shows coming up, at least in the immediate future. But yeah, my work is all over the internet, and yeah, I'm hoping to get some stuff out there. Hopefully this fall. This series won't be done. I have the production deadline for my set was, I think, October 1st, 2021. So I'll be working on this for quite a while. It's my main focus, and when it's done, I'll be really excited to show it out.
Great. I think Julia's gonna hop in now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. It's really wonderful to see what you've been working on recently, and I can't wait to see these latest pieces in person. I have a question about these pieces. When you imagine them in a gallery setting, since they are, as you mentioned, almost at that 1-to-1 ratio, would you have them leaned up against the wall rather than hanging, so that the mirror face has a chance of catching, viewers of, say, average to taller heights? Because you can imagine if they're hanging on the wall, then maybe some people wouldn't be able to catch their own reflection, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, they'll be hung. They're not all. The portrait area isn't all at the same height within the piece for each one.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
Lower based on sort of the event that's taking place. I basically wanted to take like a really significant event that happens in these characters' lives, place them in it, and then kind of vary, where they kind of sit in each one. So if you're shorter, maybe you can't see one, but you can kind of, hopefully, you'll be able to engage with all of them. But yeah, I kind of accounted for that a little bit.
Cool. That sounds like it'll be a really interesting viewing experience. And I enjoy very much the fact that you're kind of playing to what you mentioned earlier about, what is art and, the art object, but really for this piece, the audience member fulfills kind of the piece, and they make the piece as they view it, and everyone has their own individual experience of it. So I look forward to seeing that anyways. A question in from the audience, just about the medium that you work in. How did you become interested in oil painting? And, there aren't a lot of oil painters anymore, and but you're clearly committed to this medium. So just if you want to talk a little bit about how that happened and why you enjoy working in this medium so much.
Sure. So when I was really young, I did a lot of sketching and a lot of pencil work. that was definitely I mean, I've been making art since I was a little kid, and I did that for several years, and wasn't really interested in painting so much. But I took I think 7-year hiatus from art making in high school, college, and was just interested in rock and roll and playing in a band and exploring music. And kind of when I came back to painting, or came back to art, kind of felt like I had already explored the medium of graphite, charcoal, and I wanted to really just add some color into the work that I was doing. And I started off in acrylic, and then just quickly moved into oil painting. I just like the consistency of oil paint. You can manipulate it for days on end, which, depending on how you're working, that could be stifling for sure. In sort of what I do, it works to my advantage for sure. I'm not really sure what the production process would look like if these were all done in acrylic and everything was drying every 10, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure I'd be able to do any of them, to be honest.
Great. Well, that is all the time we have for questions today, but thank you so much for sharing your work with us, and I will let Carrie wrap us up.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to learn more about your work and see the past pieces and current pieces. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. This will be posted on YouTube if you want to look back at it. And our next lunch break will be this Friday, the 8th at 1 p.m. with socio-ecological artist Colleen Flanagan. And you can join our mailing list at sciartinitiative.org to stay up to date on what we're doing. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Very much.